Spirit Airlines, one of America's most recognizable budget carriers, has officially ceased operations immediately after 34 years in business and a failed $500 million bailout attempt that collapsed when bondholders refused the Trump administration's final terms. Thousands of workers are now out of jobs. Hundreds of thousands of passengers are stranded or scrambling for refunds, and the question of whether the government was right to walk away is already becoming one of the most heated economic debates of the week. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is this a story about a free market working as it should? Or did the Trump administration just abandon thousands of American workers for the sake of a philosophical talking point?
Thanks, Emma. And look, I want to push back on the framing of that question immediately, because I think it's exactly the framing the left wants us to use. The Trump administration didn't abandon anyone. Spirit Airlines abandoned Spirit Airlines. This is a company that built a business model so fragile that a fuel price spike, a predictable fuel price spike, could bring the entire thing down. The Trump administration put a proposal on the table, a final proposal. The bondholders said no. That's not government failure. That's a market adjudicating on a bad bet. Ben Shapiro has made this argument so many times, it should be tattooed on the wall of every congressional office. When you remove consequences from bad decisions, you guarantee more bad decisions. And I'd go further. If the Trump administration had written that $500 million check under those conditions, every struggling airline with bad management and worse balance sheets would be lining up at the Treasury door within 12 months. The precedent matters enormously here.
But Marcus, here's what I'd push back on. We bailed out the banks in 2008. We bailed out the auto industry. We bailed out airlines after COVID. Isn't the Trump administration applying a principle inconsistently here? And Sophia, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Marcus isn't wrong about the free market principle, but here's what I think he's missing in the political context. The inconsistency Emma just identified is real, and it matters. The 2008 bank bailouts, the auto bailouts, the post-COVID airline support, all of that was justified, rightly or wrongly, on systemic risk grounds. The argument was that these entities were too interconnected to fail without catastrophic downstream effects. Spirit Airlines does not meet that threshold. Spirit carried somewhere between 2 and 3% of total U.S. air passenger volume. The capacity it provided can be absorbed by Frontier, Allegiant, and the legacy carriers on most of its routes. So the actual systemic risk argument for this bailout was always paper thin, and the Trump administration was right to test it against hard numbers. Where I part ways with Marcus slightly is on the bondholder dynamics. The real story here is that the people with the most leverage in these negotiations, the bondholders, made a calculated bet that the government would blink first. They were wrong. And that's actually a healthy signal to send.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but, and I say this with respect, she's being too generous to the institutional players here. The bondholders didn't just make a miscalculation. They ran a strategy of brinksmanship with taxpayer money as the potential prize. And this is what should make every conservative's blood boil. These are sophisticated financial actors who bought distressed Spirit debt at a discount, specifically hoping for a government rescue that would pay them out at par or better. That's not capitalism. That's corporate welfare by another name. It's the same game played in slow motion. When Tucker Carlson talks about the corrupt alliance between big finance and big government, this is exactly what he means. You don't solve that problem by handing them the $500 million. You solve it by making absolutely clear that the Treasury is not a backstop for bad private bets.
Here's what I want to know, because this is the question that matters for the next 6 months. If Spirit's capacity disappears from leisure routes and secondary markets, fares go up, working Americans get squeezed, and Democrats use that as ammunition for more regulation. Sophia, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, the short-term pain on specific routes is real, but temporary. History is actually quite clear on this. When a budget carrier exits a market, fares spike, but competition follows the margin. Frontier and Allegiant have been expanding aggressively. The real risk over 6 months isn't that cheap travel disappears. It's the political narrative that gets constructed around the price spikes when they happen. If Democrats can point to a 40% fare increase on the Dallas to Orlando route and say, this is what happens when Trump lets airlines die, that's a powerful political weapon, regardless of whether it's economically accurate. The Trump administration needs to get ahead of that story now, not reactively.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario nobody's really talking about yet. If this becomes a template and Congress starts pushing for mandatory route protections, pricing regulations, or enhanced government oversight of airline financial structures as a response to the Spirit collapse, we're looking at a regulatory overreach that will make the aviation market significantly less competitive over the long term. History tells us that crises, real or manufactured, are almost always the mechanism through which government expands. The Spirit collapse is small. The regulatory response to the Spirit collapse could be anything but.
Sobering analysis from both of you. Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves. Thank you. One thing is absolutely certain tonight. Somewhere in the Spirit Airlines boardroom, there's a very expensive lesson being learned about the difference between a safety net and a blank check. And the Trump administration just made sure everyone knows which one they're offering.